Thank you very much to President Yom for inviting me to participate at this forum and for the organizing committee for organizing. So I'll begin by describing a little bit the need for education to catch up with population growth. So this is a graph showing you the growth of the population in California from the beginning of the 20th century to today. And you could see that in over 100 years, the California population grew by well over 20-fold. Most people think of California as already being full of people, but at the end of the 19th century, California almost had no people in it. Now, California today is one of the largest economies in the world, and the reason for that is, among other reasons, because 7 of the top 100 American universities are based in California. Now, again, most of these universities are quite new, because, again, nobody was living in California until about 120 years ago. But these universities have led, in many ways, the innovation economy. So I'll describe Stanford, which is very close to my home. This is a map of Palo Alto. Palo Alto is just on the other side of a street from Stanford. It's quite a short walk. And some of the most important technology companies were started a short walk from Stanford, including companies like Hewlett-Packard, which started the computer revolution in some ways. Fairchild, which is a company that invented the first integrated circuit, as well as more new companies like Google and like Facebook that, again, started within a very short distance from the Stanford campus. Today, India is experiencing very rapid growth. And the rapid growth in India, as you could see, is exponential, as opposed to the growth in California, which was fast but more linear, which allowed California to build universities quite quickly. The other difference is the numbers. While California has tens of millions of people, India, as you know, has today over 1.2 billion people. And it's not the only country growing very, very rapidly. For example, Brazil is growing at a very rapid pace as well. And there's simply no way that doing what was done in California, which is establishing typical universities, will work. India has a network of elite universities called India Institute of Technology, or IIT. Today there is a little over a dozen of these campuses, and the largest one of them is only 14,500 students. So again, they can't really solve the problem for a country of 1.2 billion that's growing very rapidly. So India started a few decades ago, modeled after the UK Open University, the Indira Gandhi National Open University. That university today has more than 3 million students. And it is more than 200 times the size of one of the IITs. Now, the thing is that I've been working in Silicon Valley for more than 3 decades, and I've met many, many, many IIT graduates, but nobody from this very large university. And the reason for that is potentially that the quality of the education is simply not sufficient to allow people to immigrate and come to Silicon Valley. And 3 million people, while being a very impressive number, is still, in fact, quite small in relation to the growth of the enrollment at Coursera. So Coursera is growing and has been growing for the past several quarters at more than 5 million students every single quarter, which is 3 months. And so you would think, okay, that's a solution. We can just have everybody attend Coursera, which offers MOOCs, which are massive open online courses, and they'll solve the problem. And this is not a big secret that I learned on the Coursera board. This is simply by asking GPT the question, what is the issue with massive open courses? And as you could see, it highlights 2 key differences or issues. The first is completion rates. Many people start taking the courses, but quite a small number finish them. And the second, which also leads, by the way, to the low completion rates, are the lack of interaction. There is very little interaction between the students and very little interaction between the students and the faculty members. And so I went and studied one of the oldest universities of the world. It's been around for almost 1,000 years, which is Oxford. And I went to their website to see how do they teach. And their way of teaching is very, very different. Each one of their students participates most of their 4 years at Oxford in tutorials. These tutorials are classes of between 2 and 3 students talking to a professor. And it's very much about conversations and about exploring the material in very small groups. This was studied by a very famous education science psychologist by the name of Bloom. He calls it the 2 sigma problems, as in 2 standard deviations. What you can see in this graph is if you have a student studying with a tutor on a one-to-one basis, they are likely to improve by 2 grade levels. So a C student goes to a student. Or if you look at the bell curve at the Gaussian distribution, it shifts to very much to the right by 2 standard deviations. That's why it's called the 2 sigma problem. So the question is, can you achieve this very dramatic improvement in learning outcomes, but at scale? So this is a very modern company in India. It's called PhysicsWallah. It was started about 8 years ago by a person who had a YouTube channel, where on the YouTube channel, he was teaching students how to prepare for the entrance exams in India. And over time, he took what he developed and made it from a YouTube channel into centers. They have more than 200 centers, and that allowed them some growth. But then they found about how to use AI in a very efficient way. And so today you can see that more than 85% of their 3 million students is coming from more of the 2nd and 3rd tier cities in India, which are not the major cities, and that offer much less educational opportunities to the students in those cities. And they also use AI not just to offer very high quality education to the students, but also to offer very high help to the teachers, so all the administrative functions are done by computers, so the teachers can focus their time on the students. This company, by the way, has now achieved unicorn status. The last funding round, which was about 2 months ago, valued the company at $2.8 billion, which is a 28 times multiple of the revenue, which is, in today's economy, quite impressive. Now, what allowed them to develop this very high quality offering is the fact that they already had a lot of data. Data is today the new oil. They have today more than 1 million questions which they've fed into the AI models, and also more than 20,000 videos. So they started with a wealth of data that they used in order to generate a very high quality experience for their students. Now you can say, okay, that's quite interesting, but probably not possible to do years ago. And so I'd like to offer this example, and you could find the full paper online. It was written by Professor Jim Gibbons, who was later the Dean of Engineering at Stanford. So Professor Gibbons in 1975, which was even before Bloom wrote the paper about the 2 sigma problem, he decided to see how they can take the Stanford education and bring it to the companies in Silicon Valley so their employees can benefit from courses at Stanford. And so he tried to do it in 3 different ways. The first was they recorded on something called a video cassette, which I think most people here are too young to remember, but there were cassettes where you could record video on, and they would send these video cassettes to different companies in Silicon Valley, and students would sit and watch the recording. Where you see over here on the bar chart where it says TV, they also used broadcast TV to broadcast on a local channel the Stanford courses to these local companies, and students can call using a telephone with questions. And on the far right, where you have this large bar graph, this is what he called televised video instruction, or tutored video instruction, sorry. And what he did over there was he would send with the cassette that was recorded a student who was taking the course at Stanford. And that student would stop the cassette every few minutes. And in these few minutes, they would discuss the material. And if a employee of this particular company, which was Hewlett-Packard, did not understand the material, it gave that person an opportunity to ask a question and to receive an answer, so they weren't left behind in the material. And what those bar graphs show are the average score of each of the four groups. So as you would expect, the Stanford students did quite well. In fact, they ended up doing better than the people who just got to watch the live TV broadcast or the people that got to see the recorded video. But the group that did by far the best, the group on the right, the ones who were the tutored videotape instruction, they were the ones who performed better than the students at Stanford who were taking the course. And you can say, well, it's probably an example of cherry picking, which means that to generate a good result, you pick the best subjects. But that, in fact, is not the case. So on the right scatter plot, what you could see, the little black dots, these are the Hewlett-Packard employees that participated in this course. And the white dots are the Stanford students who were in this course. And on the x-axis, this is the academic achievement of these students. So how well prepared they are for the material, and this was a combination of their undergraduate average score plus some standardized exams. And you could see that these Hewlett-Packard employees actually scored lower than Stanford students on these tests in many ways, but performed much higher in this grade. So again, this is yet one more example of how tutoring gives a significant advantage in education. So the question is, how can you do it at scale? And the answer, not surprisingly, is to use it, to use AI in order to perform the function that was done by this human student. And in fact, at Engageli, I'll show in a second some results we've achieved doing it. With today's technology, it's not very much in the future. We intend to offer this technology in the next few months, where basically a professor records their talk. That talk, using AI, is automatically segmented into these small chunks that refer to a particular topic. We then use AI in order to automatically pause the recording and ask some questions that relate to the material that was just presented. And again, this gives the tutoring aspect of questions and answers. And it also allows students to ask questions about that particular segment or even what happened before, so the students are not left behind. And so this is part of an offering we call Engageli Studio, which allows to take recorded classes and make them much more interactive, and take what could be a just standard recording and make it into more of this tutored interaction. And you could do this at scale, obviously, because you could take a course taught in a university somewhere in Latin America and do all this work without or with very little human intervention. And so I took our first prototype of the system and I recorded myself giving this talk. And I just basically recorded it. I didn't do anything special. All that the system got was audio of my recording. And it automatically transcribed it. And based on what I was talking about, the system came up with a few questions and some answers. Obviously, one of the answers is right and the other answers are wrong. All this is completely automatic. Everything I'm showing you, and I'll show two more of these, were done with zero intervention on my part. I didn't edit the results. I didn't tell the system where to break the video. It was done completely automatically just based on the talk track. And you could see on the left, the system took the audio talk track, broke it up into topics, and inserted a question after each one of these topics. So I hope all of you can answer this question correctly about basically California. There is also, I just covered this topic, so I hope you can answer this as well. And again, not just did the system come up with a question, but it also came up with the answers, the right answer and the wrong answers. And this is the last example I will give. Again, question about Oxford was completely automatically generated. By the way, I apologize, a little bit out of sequence. So, asked GPT about what are the advantages of AI tutors. And again, it had a very good set of answers. They're available 24/7. They offer very personalized learning. They are very consistent. Robots don't get tired. They don't get angry. They don't get bored. They always perform at the highest level that the robot can do. And important to this talk, it's completely scalable. You could roll out as many of these robotic tutors as you would like. And most importantly, to some extent, is you could do data-driven insight. Like anything, by measuring, you can improve. And so these robots can see what works, what doesn't work, and adjust the way they teach based on people's learning behavior as well as what worked in the past with other students. And so before we get too excited about AI, I want to give a little history lesson about AI, something that I've been interested in for about 4 decades. This is a chat that I prepared in preparation to this talk with a chatbot called Eliza. Does anybody here know Eliza? I see one person in the audience. 2 people in the audience, okay, thank you. The first time I used Eliza was when I was in high school in the 1970s. But actually, Eliza, and if you read basically the transcript here, it kind of makes sense. But this was actually created even before I went to high school. This was created a year after I was born by Joseph Weizenbaum in MIT. And Eliza was running on a computer that's substantially less powerful than the computer in my thermostat today. So this was not even running on something as powerful as my Apple Watch. It was running on a computer that today you wouldn't use in a sewing machine. And people were so excited about the capabilities of Eliza that in his paper, Joseph Weizenbaum says that his secretary thought when she was typing to Eliza, she was typing to a regular human being. And by the way, it takes a few minutes to figure out how to break Eliza. But if you just talk to Eliza in a normal way, it behaves very much like a human being. Again, using very simple software. And so this brings us to a topic of AI, like most things in life, are not just up and to the right. And so there have been a couple of AI winters in the past where the hope that people had for how AI is going to revolutionize the world surpassed what AI could actually do. Again, I mean, most people who see, or all people who see psychologists in the past 50 years do not talk to Eliza, they talk to a human being. And so that led to a period of time where it's called an AI winter, where people lost interest in AI, but then technology changed and improved, and things got better, and the growth of AI continues. And so we believe that there are still benefits for human teachers over AI. Again, this is, I think, understood by everybody in this room, but people tend to be more empathetic than computers. It's easier to socially interact with a human being than with a robot, at least today, and so on. So our belief is that the best is to combine the power of artificial intelligence with what humans bring to the equation. And so this is why at the heart of Engageli we have the concept of a tables. The concept of a tables is just like any classroom, small classroom. You have tables, students are seated around tables, they can interact with each other, they can interact with the teacher, and this allows people to have a social interaction in addition to learning. one of the things we saw in Coursera was that people who took a Coursera course as a group, so 2 or 3 people that decided to take a Coursera group courses together, they were 3 to 5 times more likely to complete the course. The reason for that is the social interactions and the fact that one person could help the other in the material. And so at Engageli, we allow people to form this completely organically. They can decide with who to study, and this is true about live material as well as recorded material. So you can say, oh, I'm studying this course on physics today, and I'm looking at some material, and basically it's like a watch party on Amazon. You can open your session and people can join you and study with you this particular topic. So in today's era, where I can literally ask my watch any question and that you can find on the internet, and it'll give me an answer, just regurgitating information is not really very interesting. And what I'd like to do, and again, I have nothing against MBAs, but I'd like to give a small example from MBAs, from business students. And so if you look at the US, there's a number of business schools that are ranked by US News and World Report. To be more precise, 124. And so I took the top 10 and the bottom 10. And you could see that the average salary starting right out of business school between a top 10 school and a bottom 10 school is more than 3 times more. So you can say, well, that's understandable. And when you look at the Fortune 500, you could see that just Harvard generates a significant percentage of the Fortune 500 CEOs. And overall, you could see that the graduates of these top 10 schools make up a very meaningful amount of the top management in the top American companies. So you can say, okay, probably all the entrepreneurs that started all these very successful companies all have MBAs. So I made a list of the top entrepreneurs in the past couple of decades, and very interestingly, they have precisely 0 MBAs between all of them. And these are people who started some of the most valuable companies on the planet. You could see them on the chart that one of the previous speakers gave. By the way, of all these people, only one of them has a business degree. That's Mark Benioff, the founder of Salesforce, and it's not a master's, it's an undergraduate. Most of these people either have an engineering degree or like Sergey, Larry, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates dropped out. And so again, I went back to Oxford, and it's not just true in Silicon Valley. It is true that independent thought is extremely important. And this, again, is one of the things that Oxford highlights in the benefit of the way they educate. And they also highlight the fact that employers value this ability to independently think. So that begs the question of how can you figure out how good and independent a thinker is. And so today there's a notion that's coming up quite rapidly called authentic assessments. Authentic assessments are not a measurement of what did you remember from what your professor taught you last week, which is what I was typically tested on. It was more about how can you complete a complex task, usually in a group setting. So it's more of a useful predictor of how people behave in real life. Now, today's universities are completely not set up to do this type of assessment. It's very, very hard to do. It's very, very hard to scale. In order to do this, you need to come up with a real-life example. And I'll give one from a business strategy course. You basically have to come up with a real task. And these real tasks have to be different for every group. And every group has to perform the task, and then they have to be measured on how they did it. And so this is a pretty typical example that these students form groups, and these groups then join a local small business. study what the business is, do a SWOT analysis, which stands for strength, weakness, opportunities, and threat, and advise the business on how they should improve their business to have a better growth rate. Again, my elder daughter attended UC Berkeley, one of the top universities in the US. Berkeley does not offer that. In order for her to experience an authentic assessment, Berkeley students self-organized and created a consulting club, and that consulting club hires themselves out to different businesses, and that's where they gain real experience. And it was her experience from this type of work that she did independently that led to her getting a job. And so again, it's very hard to measure this at scale because you have to measure the quality of the SWOT analysis, you have to understand how deep the analysis was, and so on. And so this again is something that we think AI can be incredibly efficient at because there's no other way to do this very important work without using artificial intelligence. For example, even today, it's not hard for any of the large language models to easily judge the quality of written material or to look at the SWOT analysis and so on. And so by using AI, you could dramatically accelerate this assessment process. Another thing that you could do with AI that would be very, very, very hard to scale otherwise is simulations. So this is the Federal Aviation Authority manual. Everything you need to learn in order to become a pilot or at least to pass the pilot exam, you can learn from this book. My question to you is, would you feel very comfortable flying from Korea to the US on a pilot that never actually tried flying before, who just read and memorized this book? And so in fact, the vast majority of pilots, actually all the pilots, train using simulators. This is a simulator for a large airline. Today, you could even use a simulator on your PC to learn how to fly small planes. So with AI, you could do today many simulations that are useful in preparing for real life. For example, it's always very uncomfortable to give not so good feedback to a subordinate. This can be simulated by a computer. Or how to manage your time most efficiently. Or human beings actually do not like change, so how to convince a group to adopt change, which is important. All this can be done using AI-driven simulations. Google, in fact, offers for free, for those of you who are looking to practice an interview, they have an interview simulator. So the computer prepares you for an interview. One more thing I'd like to show that can be done today at scale with AI is storytelling. And so really good teachers tend to be very good storytellers in order to engage the audience. So this is a professor from Wharton, which is the University of Pennsylvania. He wrote a book. He fed his book to a Google AI notebook. And automatically from this, again, he claims zero intervention, I believe him, it created a podcast. So let me show you what the podcast sounds like. Well, in any case, I'll go back to the slide. You could find this podcast online. It literally sounds like a man and a woman talking about his book. It's unbelievable. We tried the same software. We took one of the Engageli talks, we fed it in, and it generated a very compelling podcast where it sounded exactly like what you would find on Apple. And so we believe that it's important to use all the capabilities you can in order to scale education. And that means virtual classrooms. That means using on-demand recorded classes. That means using simulations. That means using capabilities like I showed you with tutored video instruction. And we've been working hard to incorporate everything into one platform that supports all these modalities. The importance of having it all in one platform are numerous. Firstly, the data layer is shared across all the modalities. So when a student learns in a live session, the way they learn is not dramatically different than the way they learn when they watch a recorded class. And so it's really important to collect all this information as a student goes through the learning journey. So to summarize, with the rapid growth in populations in many parts of the world, it's imperative to find a way to provide the populations in these countries with high quality education. Just having people watch recorded classes is not really a great way because of the completion ratio issue. You'll have a very small percentage of the people completing. And the other thing that the quality of education they're getting just by watching the recorded classes is simply not as good as what you can deliver today at the same scale using artificial intelligence. Now, these advances in large language models have made it possible to do things that were almost impossible to do a few years ago. So the first is almost human-like interactive tutors that can understand what a student needs to learn, help them learn, as well as challenge the student and help the student grow as a learner. A second thing that you could do today is to accelerate the generation of quality learning materials. Just listening to somebody talk like I'm doing now is candidly not super interesting. It's much more interesting to have more of an interaction. So when people have conversations, it's usually not one person who's doing all the talking, it's a conversation. And so as I showed, using AI, it's not so hard to take a talk, break it up into small segments, and make it into much more of a conversation. As we discussed, simulations are very important to do. Simulations used to be limited to things like flying or race car driving or other types of more physical activities. Today, using large language models, it's possible to simulate anything that the knowledge worker would encounter in real life and practice. And then lastly, it's very important to automatically create I'm sorry again that the podcast didn't come through, but it's very easy today to create high quality stories that combine audio, video, text, and so on. And lastly, I'd kind of pose this question to the group. The authentic assessment problem has not been solved. It's possible to do these authentic assessments, to craft them by hand for a particular topic, but it's very hard to do this at scale in a very general way. And so this is an area where I think a lot of important work needs to be done in order to allow assessments to really be valid and useful for employers in this era where all the information is readily available by everybody. So thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to have a short Q&A session. We have several questions from the audience, and Mr. Avida, can you look at the screen? There are a list of questions here. If you look at this screen, the big screen, you at the back? No, at the back. You turn around on the screen, yes.
All right.
So you can read some of the questions.
Yeah, I can knock them off pretty quickly. So we believe one of the strategies to improve on the low completion ratios is to really create these small learning clusters that create interactions between the students and self-motivate each other to achieve better completion rates. Obviously, making the storytelling more interesting will help a lot. I don't know how many of you have seen some of the courses. It depends very much on the quality of the instructor, but most of them are just somebody sitting and talking. So by having a lot of video clips that again can be generated by AI, having things that feel like a podcast embedded in these classes will keep people retained longer.
Thank you. And can we take another question?
So this is a very good question. So the question here is, what happens in table mode when you are watching the recorded classes? And we built a platform in a way that the tables persist. So the way to think about Engageli, it's basically like a classroom. And in the classroom, you have those tables. And sometimes the teacher is talking, and the people are sitting in the room with the teacher. But other times, the students can come into the room, sit at the table, watch a class, interact with the class, do their homework, and they can invite their friends to join the table. So the same way that the table works in a live class, it works exactly the same with recorded classes.
Okay. And maybe one last question?
So I'll actually touch on the last one, but answer the one above.
Okay.
So many years ago, I had the great privilege of being in a very small group with Steve Jobs. And somebody asked Steve Jobs what he thinks the future of technology will be in 5 years. And Steve Jobs was definitely one of the most brilliant thinkers in technology of the last century, said he cannot see more than 1 or 2 years forward. So if Steve could not see more than 1 or 2 years forward, definitely I cannot either. On the question above it, how do I define quality learning outcomes? To me, fundamentally, a quality learning outcome means that the objectives of the students have been achieved. And to me, the objective of most students, candidly, is to get a good job. And I think in today's era, where most people will have multiple different careers because of the rate of change that keeps accelerating, a quality learning outcome means that somebody comes, they attend the university, and they get the job of their dreams. So that's how I personally define quality learning outcomes.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up this Q&A session. 댄 아비다님께 큰 박수를 부탁드립니다. Thank you.
Thank you.